On a rainy night in Paris, a black luxury car sped through the empty streets, chased relentlessly by a pack of motorcycle photographers. Inside sat one of the most famous women in the world, the Princess of Wales, trying desperately to escape the flashing cameras. Minutes later, deep inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, the vehicle crashed violently into a concrete pillar. The driver and her companion died instantly. The princess, gravely injured, was rushed to a hospital, but the world would soon learn she did not survive. For millions across the globe, this was a shocking tragedy. But for some, the crash was only the beginning of a story far darker and more complicated than the public was told. Hours after the accident, a senior police detective arrived at the hospital where the princess lay fighting for her life. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of machines. The detective's expression was grim as he stepped out to speak to gathered journalists. Official statements were brief and clinical. "The princess's injuries are severe," he said. "We are doing everything we can." Behind the scenes, investigators found contradictions and unexplained gaps. The princess's driver, trusted and experienced, was said to be intoxicated. The security cameras in the tunnel were mysteriously disabled. Emergency response took longer than expected. And a private letter written by the princess months earlier, warning of an orchestrated accident, had suddenly resurfaced. As questions mounted, whispers of conspiracy began spreading through the press and public. Was it really a tragic accident? Or something far more sinister? By the time Diana's death was confirmed, the French authorities were already moving to close the case. Their report was clear. Her driver was drunk, her car was speeding, and the paparazzi had caused chaos. But as early morning turned to day, a sense of unease swept across Europe. Something felt too controlled, too quick, too clean. Witnesses near the tunnel described hearing a loud bang before the crash, one that didn't sound like a collision. Others claimed to have seen a mysterious vehicle exit the tunnel seconds after the accident. A dark Fiat Uno that was never located. Paint traces from that same Fiat were later found on the Mercedes. It was a detail buried in paperwork, unaddressed in the official story. More troubling was the condition of the tunnel itself. Not a single CCTV camera had captured the crash. Not before, not during, not after. The entire stretch, part of a busy Paris route, was a blackout. French authorities claimed the cameras were simply not recording. But to many, this was the first true crack in the official narrative. That, and the fact that Diana had not died on impact. She was alive, trapped in the back seat, for nearly an hour. Eyewitnesses described seeing her blinking, whispering. One photographer even claimed she murmured, "Leave me alone," as flashbulbs went off through the shattered windows. Emergency services didn't rush her to the nearest hospital. Instead, she was treated on site for nearly 40 minutes, then taken to a hospital further away. In total, nearly 2 hours passed between the moment of the crash and her arrival in surgery. Medical experts later suggested that internal bleeding from a torn pulmonary vein had gone unchecked for too long. Had she been taken directly to the nearest trauma center, they argued she might have survived. That suggestion that Diana could have lived is what truly ignited the rage that followed. And then came the letter. A private note, handwritten by Diana and sealed months before her death, had been given to her butler and longtime confidant. In it, she expressed fear. Not vague worry, not paranoia, specific, detailed fear. That her former husband, the future king, was planning to have her killed in a staged car crash. "My car's brakes will fail," she wrote. "I will suffer a head injury. It will look like an accident." When the letter was revealed years later during official inquests, it was dismissed by some as emotional venting. But when placed beside the real events of that night, the crash, the injuries, the absence of seatbelts, the blackout cameras, it felt more like a blueprint. British intelligence was questioned discreetly. MI6 officers denied involvement. Yet one former agent came forward to testify that plans for car crash assassinations had been discussed in the agency's playbooks, not in connection with Diana but as real-world methods. He cited one plan that involved blinding a driver with strobe lights in a tunnel. Exactly what some witnesses claimed happened that night in Paris. The British government called the claims baseless, but they refused to release classified documents from the period even after repeated requests from international media. As the months passed, a second theory gained traction, that Diana had been pregnant. It was never confirmed. No medical evidence was ever released. But those closest to her companion insisted that she had planned to announce her engagement within days. If true, the implications were seismic. The mother of the future king carrying the child of a foreign Muslim businessman, something the royal establishment might not have been prepared to accept. Mohammed al-Fayed, the companion's father, remained convinced his son and Diana had been murdered. He pointed to surveillance, missing footage, and silent pressure from unnamed officials. But his words were easily dismissed by the public as a grieving father looking for meaning. And yet, with each year that passed, fewer people believed the official story. Polls across Britain and the United States showed a steady rise in those who believed Diana's death had not been an accident. The narrative was too neat. The pieces too perfectly arranged. The absence of footage, the delayed ambulance, the missing Fiat, the silence from Buckingham Palace, it all hinted at a cover-up carefully constructed from the inside. In the hours after the world learned of Princess Diana's death, a strange quiet fell over the United Kingdom. There were no immediate words from Buckingham Palace. No televised statements. Just silence. For a nation that had revered her even after she was no longer officially royal, the lack of emotion from the institution was jarring. Diana had been only 36 years old. A mother of two. A humanitarian. And for millions, the true Queen of Hearts. But behind the palace gates, the response was slow, almost calculated. The flag above Buckingham Palace wasn't even lowered to half-mast until public anger forced their hand. It was as if the monarchy had been caught off guard by the very grief they had tried so hard to control. Outside the palace, mountains of flowers piled up on the pavement. Candles flickered through the night. Children clutched photos of her in their arms while women knelt quietly with tears in their eyes. Diana had been flawed, yes. But she had been real. Human. She hugged AIDS patients when others turned away. She held the hands of landmine victims. She looked directly at the world and let it see her pain. And that honesty had cost her everything. Even in death, she refused to become the silent, obedient figure the crown had once expected. When the British government launched its formal inquest, many expected closure. But what they got instead was a legal maze, hearings, testimony, cross-examinations. Hundreds of witnesses. And yet, every answer seemed to create new questions. The pathologist who examined Diana claimed there was no sign of pregnancy, yet no independent confirmation was ever made public. Diana's body was embalmed just hours after her death, an unusual decision, especially given the pending investigation. Blood samples from her driver, allegedly 3 times over the legal limit, were tested only by French authorities. No British pathologist ever independently verified the results. And the surviving bodyguard, the only person who could shed full light on the crash, reportedly lost all memory of the event. The final verdict declared it an unlawful killing. That Diana had died due to the gross negligence of her driver and the paparazzi chasing them. But it left too much unsaid. The missing footage from one of the most trafficked tunnels in Paris. The Fiat Uno never found. The silent security teams who reportedly knew her route but never intervened. The very idea that the most photographed woman on Earth could vanish into a tunnel and emerge in a body bag without a single clear explanation, it didn't sit right with the public. And so the legacy of her death became something more than grief. It became doubt. In the years that followed, Diana's name would be invoked not just in candlelit vigils, but in whispered conversations, documentaries, leaked intelligence reports. People didn't just want to remember her, they wanted to understand what had really happened to her. She had once described herself as a threat to the system. As someone too emotional, too public, too uncontrollable for the role she had been handed. And perhaps that's exactly why she had to be silenced. Even now, decades later, people still gather at the gates of Kensington Palace each August. Not just to mourn, but to search for meaning, for truth. Because Diana's story never ended in that tunnel. It lives on in questions that remain unanswered, in documents that remain classified, and in a quiet but persistent belief shared by millions around the world that what happened that night was no accident. And if that's true, if even one part of it was orchestrated, then history's most beloved princess didn't just die in a car crash. She was erased. Silenced in the one way that couldn't be undone. Forever frozen at 36. A life interrupted but never forgotten.